Welcome to Thinking Green. Probably nearly all the viewers know that last Tuesday there was a congressional debate held at the Garden, New London, for candidates who are running for Congress in the 2nd Congressional District, except that only 2 of the 4 candidates who will be on the ballot were invited to that debate. And so in the interest of giving them something like equal time, and also bringing up some points that the major parties very likely don't discuss. Tonight I've invited Dr. William Clyde, who's running on the Green Party line, and Daniel Reale, who is running on the Libertarian Party line. And it won't exactly be a debate, but a discussion of issues from a broader point of view than what people probably got who saw the New London debate on TV. So welcome, Bill and Dan. And I think we can start out. I'll ask each of you why you're running. And I guess you can start, Bill. You're running for the first time. Okay. And then Dan can have his turn.
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, I'm not a politician. I'm a college provost and professor. I'm running for the very first time for any office. And the reason I'm running is because I feel like we're in desperate need of change, and I don't see that change coming out of the folks in Washington. In fact, I believe that the way we're electing our candidates, our public office holders, actually precludes them being likely to offer the kinds of changes that we need. As I've been saying throughout my campaign, the two-party system right now isn't working well for us. They are fighting more than working together, more than trying to find things that they can have a common sense of things and work towards solutions. They're fighting. Actually, there was an interesting metaphor for that last week at the debates. Before the debates, all the Democrats, Courtney's supporters, were on one side of the street with their signs, and Lori's supporters were on the others with their signs, just yelling at each other, waving their signs like war parties or something. And so the two-party system I don't think is working well for us, and so the third-party piece is something that I'm happy to be part of. As you know, I started an unaffiliated candidate, but was happy to be offered endorsement from the Green Party. And then the second piece is a huge amount of money in politics, which maybe we go into later, but it's leaving our people in office committed to party alignment and to the big donors, and I don't think that's serving us.
Thanks. What about you, Dan?
Well, I'm actually running as a Libertarian for United States Congress in the 2nd District. And just before I get into myself, I think to call what happened at the Guard Art Theater a debate is sort of a misnomer. Realistically, it was a talking point session where Joe Courtney talked at Lori Hopkins Kavanaugh, and Lori Hopkins Kavanaugh talked at Joe Courtney, and you knew what they were going to say. Bill and I had the actual debate outside, and we started attracting a lot of a good sizable audience, and a lot of people were like, well, gee, we're learning something here. We're discussing the issues. So as Bill said, he's correct. I mean, Washington, there's no fundamental disagreement between Demopublicans and Demopublicans. It's really one party pretending to be two. Myself, I'm a paralegal. I work with a lot of cases which I call fraud closures. The reason I call them fraud closures is because the banks forged the documents to take the homes, and in a lot of cases there were securitized mortgages, so they were already paid, but yet they want to come collect the money twice. And unfortunately, this is a big structural problem, and unless we actually weed that bad debt out of the economy, you won't see any economic recovery whatsoever. So as far as Washington goes, we'll have a good discussion here today, and we're actually going to talk about the real issues and solutions that will fix them.
Thank you. We're going to start out with some questions that did come up in the Guard debate, and then I think we'll go on to some issues that we wish were discussed, but that there wasn't a word about. Economic development and job creation. There are a lot of people leaving Connecticut. And I don't know which of you wants to go first, but we'll take turns, whatever. And how do we create jobs?
Well, again, I mean, the first problem that we have, and this is something that Democrats and Republicans will never fix because of the way the system is. I think Clyde's going to talk about, how money influences election. I've got my points on that as well. But the first thing you have to realize is Washington, D.C. operates in this manner where we send a Republican or a Democrat, management team A or management team B, special interests donate to both candidates of both parties, so no matter who wins, they're always going to get what they want. You saw the same thing when Barack Obama ran against John McCain, Goldman Sachs, Merrill Lynch. The same guys are donating the same people. So just in case we didn't take Barack Obama, John McCain was going to do the same thing. Same thing with Mitt Romney. So the bottom line is they're handing out to special interests money that either came from us directly or came from us in the form of inflation, which is a hidden tax that nobody wants to talk about. And unfortunately, you're just not going to see, a fundamental difference in the debates and how they're structured, unless you just kind of go around. And the good news is people, I saw this outside the Guard, is I think you can agree, they realized that this is where the actual discussion was going on. So this is, we're just going to move around, we're just going to go around these guys and we're just going to make them irrelevant. So as far as improving the economy, we need to take the bad junk debt out of the system. And that's one thing that nobody's talking about. I have a plan, it's called $1 of Capital. I credit it to Mark Denninger of the Market Ticker Forum. He came up with this plan where basically, and it's true, if you force banks to only lend based on every dollar of assets or capital they have, you can't have systemic risk. Right now, what you have under Democrats and Republicans is if one bank goes boom, everybody down the line goes boom. And that bubble's going to burst again.
Bill, how do you see the challenge of job creation?
Well, the economic development question is, in some sense, a trick question for the people at the federal level because a lot of that responsibility and role is at the local and the state level. That's why it's appropriately being talked about in the governor's debate. And the 10th Amendment makes it clear what responsibilities are what level, and you don't want the federal getting into things that they shouldn't. However, there are basic things that our federal government does that are well understood to be part of the federal government's role, and they're to do with infrastructure, certainly, and infrastructure is a critical part of economic development. Companies won't move in, people won't want to move in if the roads, the bridges, all the pieces that you rely on just to be able to live and go to work and do your work are not functional. And that's something that this region of the country, this region of the state, just really like the whole country, we're in great disrepair. There are, bridges, roads, and all that are not the place we want to be. And then there's positive infrastructure support, like public transportation. That there's a lot of research to show that people can't take jobs because they have no way to get to the jobs. That's an impediment, that the job may be there, jobs are there, but nobody can get to them. So there are basic infrastructure pieces that it does make sense for the federal government to play a role. The federal government also can play a role in research investment. We'll probably talk later about diversification, and investment in basic research is something that corporations may not be able to take the risk for something that they don't really know where it's going to lead, whereas grants are a place where that's traditionally been done and been successful. So there are pieces like that and support of education. The decision making for education needs to be at local level, but support where you've got high need areas that don't have the overall funding support, and to make sure they do, to get the great education to help those folks get out of the cycle of poverty that persists if there's not good education. Those are the kinds of basic structural pieces the federal government can help with, but we want to be careful not to have them getting into the nitty gritty, which is a local and state function.
And I think, if I may interject my own opinion, a lot of the problems we have are government getting involved with things that's not really responsible for and doesn't do well. And that happens at the municipal level as well as the national.
I just throw in, at last night's debate, a lot of the conversation was about contracts Joe Courtney's been bringing here, which as Dan always points out, is our money that he's bringing back. But besides that, the role of government is not to employ us. It's to create an environment in which business can thrive. It's the pursuit of happiness, not happiness. It's to give us a capacity to be successful, not to buy things from us so that we can make money.
Well, we'll kind of go to the next question, but play off what you had said about diversification. This was a question that Paul Chouanier did ask at the Guard debate that I thought was pretty pertinent to our area. The Cold War ended during the Reagan administration, and we know that during that administration there was a lot of money that came into Southeast Connecticut to EB to build submarines. So we don't have a Cold War now. We're still dependent on submarines for a lot of the good, well-paying manufacturing jobs. And the two parts of the question are, does the country need these submarines? Is that the best thing to base our economy on? And two, can the country afford to pay the taxpayer money for those jobs to build submarines?
So I split that two ways, kind of like you did. There's one is, what are our legitimate defense needs? And two, what are employment needs? Okay, and those kind of get linked because we go like, oh, well, it'd be nice to buy more submarines because we need more people employed, but they're really two separate things. And so the first question is, what's the legitimate need for submarines? My understanding of the analysis is that in the big picture, there is a role for submarines going forward. The extent of it and whether we need them at the rate we've been having is a question. But in terms of the total weighting of investment in our defense, it seems like the analysis is that it's more heavily weighted towards submarines than it is some of the other areas of investment. But that said, getting back to the second part of it, there are a lot of smart, competent people there in New London and in that area working on the submarines, and it doesn't make sense for us to have only that as what they're thinking they're waiting to do. Only waiting all the time whether the government's going to buy some more submarines and hope they buy more and more when that may not be in the best interest, the need of the country, just so that we can have jobs. There are lots of other things that those folks could be doing, and one of the areas that, again, I don't know if we'll get into this, but is the alternative energy. There are all kinds of things about different kind of reactor types, about, wind, power, all kinds of things that require engineers, require the kind of scientific thinking that we have there right now working on submarines. And diversifying is always a good thing. And to diversify something that's not the defense industry, so much the better.
Yeah, it's interesting, that Bill mentions alternative energy, and this is true. What happened in the late 1970s, we invented a type of reactor. It's a thorium, salt reactor. What happens with this type of reactor, it runs on thorium, not uranium or plutonium. And in the 1970s, we proved it. It works. This is 1970s technology, okay? And this could dramatically reduce our dependence on oil like night and day. You know what the problem was? We were working on nuclear submarines to defeat the Russians. So we hired virtually all the scientists in that field away to work for the government to defeat the Russians. I mean, that's kind of an example of how the government just not only spends money that, doesn't belong to it, that comes from us, it also distorts markets. But what we have to do, and what we really have to do to solve our military spending problem, realistically, it is tied to our energy policy. You're not going to hear the Democrats and Republicans admit that. The reason we are in the Middle East is not just necessarily to control the oil, to take the oil, but to control how much oil gets out or doesn't get out. And of course, that's tied to what we have, it's called the petrodollar. I mean, it's a discussion we don't have really time to get into. But the fact is, we have to retool our energy policy to start building these reactors. They are dramatically safer than conventional reactors. The half-life of the material is 30 years if you don't reprocess it, which is, compared to the thousands of years you have to store the waste material. And we have thorium is everywhere. You can pull it out of seawater. You can pull it out of granite tiles. I mean, it's not this thing that's like a pie in the sky. I think we could do this right now, today. You know what would happen? We would dramatically reduce our dependence on oil. We would, alleviate some of the environmental concerns. We would drop energy costs through the floor after 5 years of getting these things online. But unfortunately, under Democrats and Republicans, they're going to milk this oil-based system all they possibly can. And and that's not to say there aren't other alternative sources like wind, solar. There's a lot of way to go on wind and solar. But on the other hand, we have this off-the-shelf technology we can use right now. And as a member of Congress, I'm going to make sure the Department of Energy just doesn't go a nuke is a nuke is a nuke is a nuke. We're going to build these things.
Now, I have a question, and this sounds like a big centralized enterprise, and a lot of jobs come from small business. I mean, we always think about incentives for the big companies and the huge employers, but really the small employers employ more people and it's more diversified. So is there anything that can be done on a national level to create a friendly atmosphere for small businesses to grow in energy or in other fields?
Certainly, I would say, well, first of all, kind of economically, you know how shopping malls, if you visit them, usually have anchor stores. Having some big businesses around help, and the smaller businesses feed off them. It's not absolutely necessary, but it's a common kind of economic structure. But basically, the things that are going to draw those small businesses are the same things that I was talking about before. Quality of life issues, great quality of life where we live, whether you want to be on the shore or you want to be in a more rural environment. The second district offers a lot of different choices. But the infrastructure pieces, all those things, the transportation, all those things are critical. The banking, there are a variety of other pieces, but it's making the quality of life be such that the businesses, so that they can attract the right kind of people here. We have educated people. We've got great universities. We've got great community colleges, and so all the resources are there to support the small businesses. And I'd really point again to the infrastructure and the education.
So we're talking about the military, and so now we'll go from the economic side to the military side. One of the questions that was asked at one of the debates is, should we be arming Syrian rebels? Is that something the U.S. should be doing?
Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, this is just a repeat of the same exact insane foreign policy we've had for decades. I mean, this goes well back, to, the 1950s easily. We didn't like Mossadegh, so what do? We had Kermit Roosevelt go in back in the 1950s, overthrow Mossadegh, and of course they had an oppressive regime, they had, the Shah, and of course the Iranians didn't like that, so they overthrew that guy. They're still a little angry at us for that. So in turn, we didn't have a government, we didn't like Iran, so we went to this guy called, you might know him, Saddam Hussein. Went, Saddam, we didn't like those guys in Iran. How would you like some weapons to go fight the Iranians? They had an 8-year war, and eventually Saddam stopped taking orders. And we've repeated this thing with Manuel Noriega as one example. We've done it in Afghanistan. The Taliban was originally our creation. We, trained them, we organized them to fight the Soviets. And this is the kind of thing where, again, it's inexorably tied to our energy policy. But this is the price we pay for our energy policy. Unless we change our energy policy, and unless we change the way things work in Washington, we're going to continue doing this until the end of time, or at least until people either get sick of it or, the dollar eventually tanks because we can't run a global empire.
What do you have to add to that, Bill?
Yeah, I'd say, first of all, I agree that our position with oil absolutely drives a lot of this, so the alternative energy conversation that we were having before is important. But I'd take a step back and say, this is one of those places where we shouldn't even be here right now. Our lack of leadership has just been stunning, and really, I point to the current administration, but I'd say even for the past 25 years at least, the Cold War ended, as you talked about, and there was a chance for American real leadership, and instead, global leadership, and I don't mean telling everybody what to do, I mean developing real relationships with the world, and that's the way you avoid things like we've got right now. But we stepped away, the Russians, came to a free market and tried to go democracy, and we kind of turned our back, and they went through a terrible decade, and then that results in them having second thoughts about what this all means and how they fit with us. We don't develop proactive relationships with the world, and I really think that the president should be spending half of his time out talking to folks, developing relationships with the rest of the world. I think, since we're running for Congress, I think that members of Congress should be in a concerted fashion, not a one by one, me going to where I think is going to, I go to win the next election, but instead us working together there are roughly 200 countries in the world, roughly 400 members of Congress, it would make sense you put 2 on each, you divide them up and you become experts in relationships, make visits in addition to our ambassadors, and make it that we're really developing relationships. The people of the world really feel like we care, we're interested, we know them. And if you do that kind of thing, things like ISIS, this whole thing, you see it happening well in advance of when it actually blows up, because you're talking to people. We don't have that happen. We get surprised by things. So then we're left reacting and dropping weapons or dropping bombs or whatever, and that's not healthy. And I won't get into the Ebola thing, but it's the same thing there. That was something that's developing for several months, and it's under the theme of lack of leadership. It was developing for several months. WHO and other groups were saying, this is going to be bad if you don't do something about it. If you do something about it, we can get this under control. We didn't do anything. It's a lack of leadership.
And suddenly we're in panic mode over something that really we shouldn't be panicked about.
If you don't manage things, they fester, and that's what happens, and we're seeing that. It's a lack of
I
leadership.
have to add something really quick to that. I mean, I would agree there's a total void of leadership, okay? But on the other hand, there are certain special interests that benefit from this, but especially when it comes to our foreign policy, it's maybe in the 1950s we could have made the argument where there was like a lack of leadership, or maybe the 1960s we could have said, maybe the Senate should do its constitutional role and supervise foreign policy. But once we started rolling into the 90s, we're like, okay, we just gave these guys weapons last week. They're absolutely crazy. We're funding this new group to fight the crazy guys we just gave weapons to last week. We knew better. Like even Dick Cheney knew better than in 2003, I believe it was. He said Iraq was a quagmire with no viable exit strategy. I'm like, well, that was actually the same conclusion I came to back then. I knew it was a bad idea. The 9/11 Commission even said it had nothing to do with 9/11. But nonetheless, it's kind of like a foreign policy of not so much as necessarily just a lack of leadership. It's a lack of, we don't care, because these people will keep sending us to Washington. Why should we bother?
Well, I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned how all these groups are fighting each other and fighting us with our weapons, largely. So are we hooked on this weapons industry economically the same way we are with the subs? And if we are, what's the way out?
I'd probably say, again, the way out is we have to change our energy policy. I mean, that's the only other way. I mean, again, we have stuff that's been on the shelf since the 70s. We can use it. On the other hand, we are going to have to transition. I mean, as a libertarian, fundamentally, I am disgusted with the concept that, we need to buy government things to keep people. That's just not the proper role of government at all. But on the other hand, we're going to need a transition period where we can kind of move the economy toward, a place where that will work. So I would say the first step is to go, you know what, we're gonna start something like an X Prize for nuclear technologies. The first group of people to get this thing online, you win the prize and you can continue to do it. And we're going to change our energy policy and everything's going to follow. But secondly, as far as foreign policy goes, we have to talk to Germany, Japan, all these other countries, be like, listen, we can't be your personal army anymore. You've got to have your own military and your own defense force. And as far as subs, we do have an aging fleet. We do need to replace and retool our aging fleet. But on the other hand, under a new foreign policy, we're going to need a stronger naval presence. I mean, basically, under the libertarian plan that I'm putting forward, we would have everybody would be happy with the sub production, and everybody would be our friend again. We would trade with everybody. We wouldn't pick winners and losers, and life would be good.
Now, Bill, you talked about how we should have a presence that really strives to understand each country around the world. Instead, we have bases, military bases in over 100 countries.
That's not what I had in mind.
Yeah, I had a feeling it wasn't. So how do you see a path towards Congress transforming the way we relate to the other countries around the world?
Well, first of all, I just again agree with Dan. Our oil policy puts us in a place where we feel it necessary to have a heavy hand in a region because of that. There are as bad atrocities going on in Africa, in other places that we don't, that the American people ask about and question, but we don't really consider participating in the same kind of way, and I think it's because of the economics.
Yeah, we're very selective.
But as far as, I mean, really the answer to your question is how we transform it. I suggested just now a specific strategy for transforming it. I think it's actually engaging proactively, reaching out. Look, leading is the same whether you're in an organization or whether you're leading a nation. I mean, I'm a provost. I'm a leader in the college. I talk to the people that I work with all the time. I know what's going on in each of their areas, and we talk when there are little problems. We take care of them, and you do something about it. And if something happens unbelievable, just out of the blue, that was unanticipated, you've got relationships with people so that you can work through and do it together and come out in one piece. We need the same thing at the world level. We need to have it that we know the people and we know, how's their family. It doesn't have to be exactly that level, but it needs to be that you have a relationship with them. And when you do, then again, you're going to hear things just in the conversations that are going to be valuable to planning going forward. And if something bad happens, as things do periodically, you're going to have a basis for working forward out of it and not having it to be bases that are used. You're going to have a basis for doing it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I agree. I mean, leadership, it definitely, the way America used to be was, we would do it right. And everybody go, wow, America, that's a great idea. Let's do that. Fortunately and unfortunately, we're getting an example from Brazil, Russia, China, and India. They created this organization called BRICS. What they're doing right now is kind of like we got with Europe. They were tired of the old colonial model, and they've decided to lay an internet cable linking all of those different countries. They've decided to enter cooperative trade agreements. They're tired of the petrodollar, wherein basically we produce nothing of value but only export our casino debt. This is the kind of thing, we have an opportunity to get engaged and lead in BRICS and be a critical part of that and get back in touch with our entrepreneurial and industrial type of values that, where we went, look, we made a better mousetrap. Instead, we're kind of locked into this whole thing on trade policy. And this is one of the things that's killing jobs, is our trade policy. Joe Courtney's policy that he supported, and the Republican would be presumably the same, I haven't heard any comment from her differently, would be to support, the World Trade Organization, NAFTA, CAFTA, GATT, where basically we export our high drug prices and our textile jobs. So we have to, as far as a trade policy, we have to say everybody's on a level playing field, no subsidies for, no disincentives against, and we really need to start getting active and participating in BRICS. Because the train's leaving, whether we're on it or not, that's up to us.
Well, and just to, all these things are tied together. One of the areas in which our entrepreneurial strength can come through is the alternative energy piece that we were talking about before. That's something that right now the train is leaving. There are other countries that are a little ahead of us, but not so far ahead of us that we couldn't catch it if we dedicated ourselves to doing that, the kind of diversification in which Eastern Connecticut could play an important role, as we talked about before.
But right now, we are importing a lot of the manufactured items that we're using. And I keep thinking how, because, oil is peaking, transportation is just going to get more and more expensive. I think I read recently that some company got permission, they have chickens and they're sending them to China to be processed, and then they're coming back here to be sold. Wow. To me, that sounds crazy.
Especially given the food processing issues they've had in China. That sounds scary. I hope those packages are well marked.
Yeah, I don't know. And it was just a little snippet in the news a few days ago that caught my attention. Yeah,
it's kind of scary because a lot of people, they'll criticize companies like Walmart, which fundamentally, if you look at Walmart, it's a good idea. I think on its own it would have thrived. But unfortunately, Walmart, Target, a lot of the big box chain suppliers, you want to know why they kind of took over all the mom and pops? Not because necessarily they had a better mousetrap, but because you and Uncle Sam basically subsidizing Chinese slave labor and, and ensuring slave labor plants all around the world in third world places where there were no environmental laws, where there were no labor, nothing. So we basically, they basically externalized the costs over there, and now we're feeling it.
Well, I think there is a big problem in general with externalizing costs. In pure capitalism, profits would be privatized, but so would costs. We have a system where the profits are privatized, but so often the costs are socialized,
And risks, sometimes
and the
risks, as in
risks.
banking, risks.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We've seen this, whether it's something like, air pollution or water pollution that comes out of a factory, or whether it's risks like what you're talking about with the mortgage crisis.
Yeah.
We all subsidize the failures, but the profits don't exactly trickle down.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd probably put it this way so Congress understands it better. There are two people you never mess with, math and physics. You will always lose.
Now, the one other issue that came up in the debates that we'll talk about, and then after that, I welcome people to call in with their own questions, too. We could probably figure out what to talk about, but if there's something you would like to hear about, that would be good. Healthcare, I know you two come from have different ideas for solutions, but I think we agree that right now we have a system, for want of a better word, with very high costs and very mediocre outcomes. So do you want to start, Bill, on?
Sure, and I'll start it out by actually saying we haven't touched much about the campaign reform piece, but that's one of my big three topic areas, and to not go into the whole campaign reform, one of the pieces is that the large sums of money being raised mean that the people raising them, Joe Courtney in this case, end up having to make deals, make compromises, agree to things that will and will not be considered when looking at the problems in front of us, the challenges in front of us. And healthcare is a perfect example of that. Joe has, over his career, received over $700,000 from the healthcare industry, from folks in the healthcare industry, and what that means is there are parts of solutions that probably aren't on the table in his mind, and that's not going to work for us because we've got, as you said, a really difficult, big, expensive situation. Just to give a scale of it, our costs being higher than everybody else, we pay half again more per capita than anybody else in the world. Our cost as part of our government, just to give you an idea of how chunky this is, has gone in the past 50 years from 1.5% of the total federal budget to 25% of the total federal budget. It's now, if you're looking at a place to try to take care of the deficit, to try to cut back on the deficit, you go after the big pieces, and healthcare is one, and not only because it's a big chunk of the budget, but because we're overspending by half again as much as anything else. And as you said, our costs are high, and our outcomes are not.
Right, like infant mortality rates are not good.
They're not quite the top. They're far from the top, and so that's really bad. We're paying a lot and not getting very much. And the problem is, the way we've got our system set up, the incentives are all bad, are not working, and so really nobody's happy. I know doctors there are some doctors doing very well, I'm sure, but there are lots of doctors who are telling their kids, don't become a doctor, it's a bad, it's not a good lifestyle. So it's not working all around. And the ACA was set up to try to do, Obamacare was trying to fix some things, but it actually made some things worse, and it's still very complicated. So when I talk about three things. Two are incentives. First of all, the incentives for the providers need to be different than they are right now. We're on a fee-for-service, and so they're paid every time they touch you again or do a X-ray or a operation or whatever, they're paid again, and so it kind of drives them to offering more services whether or not we need them, and so that's not good for us. The incentives are wrong, and there are models out there, public and private in the U.S. and also models elsewhere in the world, where they're paid for keeping us healthy. They're paid like an amount over time for keeping us healthy, and those models are much more cost effective where they're in place. The second set of incentives is incentives for the patients themselves to be more aware of and careful about their own health, make healthy choices, diet, exercise, smoking, non-smoking, a wide range of things. There are no incentives in our system for people to make healthy choices, of course, except being healthy, that's an incentive, but no economic incentives, and that doesn't make any sense at all. And then the third piece is, as you said, I'm in favor of universal health care. I think we need a simple system that cuts out the complications. The way we've got the system set up right now, for those of us old enough to be aware, it used to be if you had a doctor in an office, you had a person out in front taking care of you. Now for a doctor in the office, you've got 5 people in there handling all the payments and calls and follow-up and all that. It's a complicated system. I think we need a single payer, probably at the state level, not the federal level, but then we need choice as far as providers so that people can go to the doctor they want and do all that. So I
you're
think
not talking about a Great Britain kind of thing where all the doctors are government employees.
No, I'm talking about a market-based supplier network, but a single payer, and also I think in all models that there's universal, there is the choice to go completely private, to buy the additional insurance, and just as there is with the school system that we have, you can go private school even though there are public schools available.
It makes a lot of sense to me in general to provide options rather than mandates. And people respond better to them.
Yeah, I mean, it's true that the healthcare system is unnecessarily complex, but because it is profitable to a few people. Now, if you actually look at the industry of healthcare, insurance, and pharmaceuticals, they do something that you couldn't do, say, in aerospace, engineering, concrete. Pick your industry. They charge different prices. They conspire with government using tax incentives to do this. So basically, you'll have 200 some odd different prices depending on who's paying. This is an absolute scam. And by the way, under Patman-Robinson, if this industry didn't have an exemption, it would be entirely illegal and a lot of people would be serving a lot of jail time. One of my proposals, and this is something I would implement as an immediate fix, because Obamacare, I'm sorry, it's not the fix, it's the same problem. We're just forcing everybody into the government-sponsored problem. What we need to do is remove those exemptions under Patman-Robinson. Because, let's face it, right now, I can buy a hospital gown on eBay for $4.50. The insurer, unless the insurer steps in, the hospital will bill me $100, but if I'm uninsured, the hospital will conspire with the insurance company to charge me $200. There's no good faith reason for that. I mean, that is corrupt. I mean, it's actually criminal. Actually, it should be criminal. It would be if we didn't have those exemptions written in law. So that's the first thing we have to do. The second thing we have to do is we have to say, I'm not in the business of price fixing, and I'm not going to, but I'm going to say, look, if you're going to do business with the public, state your price. Don't have this business where you can't possibly know what it's going to cost. Car mechanics deal with complex problems all the time, but they can tell you, here's my hourly rate. Why can't you? And the reason doctors can't do that is because we have all of these tax incentivized things wrought into our system. So that's the second thing we have to do. The third thing we have to do with insurance companies, which this is kind of true under Obamacare, it's not completely. Again, Obamacare is, I'm sorry, a scam. So the second thing we have...
It's based on Romney Care, so
yeah,
that kind of
and the Republicans did it first. They attacked this thing like it was this Democrat invention. But the second thing we have to do is if you're an insurance company, you want to write a policy, don't think you can just renege on the contract and just bank on the fact that people are too poor or lack the wherewithal to fight you. I'm fortunate. As a paralegal, I can do this on my own. But most people, they're like, I'm stuck. I don't know what to do. And that's why we have things written in law like the Federal Untrade Practices Act, which ordinarily, if it weren't for these types of exemptions, I mean, your average consumer or the Federal Trade Commission could just go in there and go absolutely hog wild and say, no, this is the contract. You honor its terms. So right now, what we're going to have, I don't care what our government system is, we're always going to have that thing because special interests will always go to the government because they're controlling the money. And this is kind of like the classic stereotypical debate of healthcare. And I'm sorry, Joe Courtney said our grandchildren will be debating healthcare. I sure hope not. I sure hope not because
if so, that's a big
first of all, I want my children to live long enough to have grandchildren. And second of all, if these problems keep remaining wrought in the system, and this kind of goes to the elephant in the room, which is Medicare. And in order to fix Medicare, we have to fix our health care in these ways. But the thing about Medicare is it's not going to be something that just shuts off and things remain the way they are. They're just going to start cutting services and doctors are going to say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to take Medicare. And that's the way it will be under Obamacare. And as far as Joe Courtney has said, it's like, oh, we can go back and fix it. I'm sorry, time's up. You've had 4 terms to work on this problem. And the reason the Republicans lost the debate is they didn't propose a solution. They still don't have a solution, but on DanRealeForCongress.com, you can actually find a solution. It's not perfect, but it's something.
Okay, You want to add something
I was
to
just
that?
going to say, you can also find a solution
Oh,
at,
yeah.
at ClydeForCongress.com. ClydeForCongress.com. It's not the same solution as Dan's, but it's another solution.
And that's part of the reason we have this program,
Yeah.
because part of our goal is that voters should be informed. And, I will later on show people what a ballot looks like in New London, at least. And their names are on the ballot, right, in the same column as Joe Courtney and Lori Hopkins Kavanaugh. And it's harder to get the message out if you're not a Democrat or a Republican, and yet you want voters to be as informed as possible to make the best choices possible. So with that, I want to talk about money, both in terms of what it means on the campaign trail and what it means for someone who is in office. And I don't know, Bill, you can.
Sure. So the first thing really is the challenge of running as a third-party candidate, and you're right. Part of it is access to money, but part of it is the access to the volunteers, the whole network piece. I mean, last night I was thrilled at that debate to have 15 students who were some interns of mine working with me there, but the Courtney group had 45 or 60 or something like that, and they just have a lot of firepower. It comes with being with the party. The bad news is you have to line up when you get there, but it certainly helps during campaigning. But I think you're pointing towards the campaign finance piece, and what that means during the campaign is we're assaulted. Most of the money is used on advertisements, television advertisements. So we're assaulted with advertisements, most of which are negative advertisements. And I'm not sure a lot of people feel very excited about receiving all that. But the real cost to it, as I alluded to before, is research indicates, and most of the opinions of people I've seen indicate, that even after they're in office, our elected officials spend 30 to 70% of their time fundraising or cultivating the relationships with people to help them get the money for the next run. So they're perpetually running for office. They're using their time to do that instead of using their time to do the jobs like building relationships with people in other countries so that we might not have to drop bombs for the Kurds or something like that. So that's not what I would think was good use of time, and that's a big cost of having the big amount of money in the system. And the second piece is really worse, which is, and I alluded to that earlier too, getting that money, because most of it comes in 5,000, 10,000, big chunks from corporations, from unions, from a variety of places, results in discussions, compromises, agreements, understandings of things that won't be discussed, won't be part of solutions that are considered. So what that means is we've got complex challenges in front of us all the time. They're solvable. We could take care of them. We could do something about them, but not if you've made certain agreements about things you won't talk about. You've made certain agreements about things you won't talk about. I've made certain. At some point, the Venn diagram is there's no overlap, and we're not having a solution. Does that sound familiar? And so the costs to us are enormous, and I really think that's what is kind of calcified what's created. I mean, the two-party system right now is part of it. They're lining up and not talking, but the money is also making it that they're not in a position to really come to the kinds of conversations that we need them to have, and so it's hugely costly, and we need an alternative.
Dan.
I know. I'd probably say, like, again, I really hate the term third party because we're actually second party candidates. Again,
Yes.
we have, and this is the reason we have, like, two parties, one party pretending to be two. There's no fundamental disagreement. Like, when it comes to Washington, it's still going to be undeclared wars, warrantless wiretapping, all of these pet projects, all of these subsidies, all of these earmarks. And one of the things that I did as a preventative measure is before I ran, for office, I decided I'm going to make my promises under penalty of perjury in the form of an affidavit. No earmarks, three terms, that's it. And I come home, and you can see the other things in the affidavit on my website, but the bottom line is that would limit me from kind of falling into these pitfalls. Now, as far as our system goes, the system isn't just rigged for, the big guys that want to influence the election and all that. I mean, under our system, our freedom of speech is limited to less than $5,000 under our system. But if you're like a big company like Walmart say, you want to get something done, you just create enough PACs to do it. I mean, what I always say, corruption is certainly legal provided you use the right forms to report it. Now, on the other hand, the Libertarian Party of Connecticut has seen the extreme end, because it's one thing to not be able to raise money, but when you are a second party, and I want to reinforce this, we are second party candidates. When you do raise money, you get serious. You run up and hurl. It's almost like you need a full-time accounting staff. Our treasurer in 2012, when we raised $80,000, which was an insane amount of money for the Libertarian Party of Connecticut, and the average donation was $50 to $60, and we got behind on the reporting. And that's the thing. The first trick we ran up to is like, did we try asking for it? But when we did, we ran into this problem, and that's what the one party pretending to be two relies on. They rely on these reporting things. The FEC, you've got Republicans and Democrats. And at the end of the day, sure, they'll gridlock each other to make sure nothing can be done to penalize either side. But as far as the election law goes, I'm not saying we should go back to the days of LBJ where you would like $30,000 in a duffel bag being left behind campaign headquarters and, dead people vote. But on the other hand, we've got to be realistic about what actual campaign reform can do.
Well, we only have 4 minutes left. I wanted to ask Bill Dan mentioned term limits. How do you feel about term limits?
I think term limits are a great idea. I think that we absolutely should have them. I think a lot of people actually support it. I'm on organizations, I'm on boards. There's none of them that I know of that doesn't have term limits. It provides a rollover ideas, not only fresh ideas all the time, but on top of that, no one gets to just sit in the position of power for a very long time and keep things from moving. That's just kills ingenuity. It kills all kinds of fresh ideas, and I think we should have term limits. I personally think that 8 to 12 years, that's 4 to 6 terms for Congress, would be appropriate.
Okay, so each of you now gets 1 minute closing statement, and we did not pick straws like last night. So who wants to go first?
It doesn't matter. I can go first. You got to go last time. Okay, so we've got 1 minute. Okay, so recent polls tell us that 90% of us are unhappy with the way Congress is serving us. I'm part of that 90%. That's the only reason I'm running. As I said, I'm not a politician. The only reason I'm running is because I'm part of that 90%. I want to ask those who are in the 90% to do a bold thing. So many of us, I know, because talking to people out on the campaign trail, are really thinking that they're so discouraged they don't want any part of this, and they're thinking to stay home from the polls, or they're just going to vote same as usual because nothing can be done. A lot of that idea is out there. If you do that, we know what's going to happen. Joe Courtney's going to win 2/3 of the vote. That's what he did the last time. We know what's going to happen. If all the other districts in the United States do the same thing, we're going to end up with the same kind of Congress as we have right now, and we're going to feel exactly the same about it as we do right now, which is not happy. If instead we use our votes as the powerful tools for change that they are, we can send a strong signal to Washington, which they desperately need, that business as usual is not okay, that we want something different from our government, and we're not going to take it anymore.
Thank you. Dan?
Well, I would agree with that, but one thing that we are facing right now is, look, we've had years of the Democrats having a 23rd chance. The Republicans certainly had their heyday. They had their opportunity to say, let's be fiscally responsible. They had their opportunity to say, we dislike regulations, let's cut the regulations. The Democrats had their chance when it came to civil liberties. They still had, today, Joe Courtney was actually elected in 2006 to stop the war in Iraq. And just a few weeks ago, he voted to give guns. He didn't even know the good guys are. He just voted to send guns over there. So as a libertarian, I would tell you, the Constitution is not a menu. And I'm not just going to take that oath when I go to Washington. I actually have an oath right now as my promises under penalty of perjury. I don't plan on being a career politician. And honestly, if you can't get it done in 3 terms, you're probably not going to get it done, and it's time to stay home and let somebody else take up the job. But what I will say is, I get the housing crisis, I get the student loan crisis. We should have meaningful relief, and it ought to happen. And if you elect me, that's what you're going to get.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to show you, spend half a minute to show you the ballot. The column 2 is the one for Congress. And you see Lori Hopkins Kavanaugh, Joe Courtney, and if you go down just a little bit, under the Independent Party, on the Green Party line is William Clyde, Bill, and right under that is the Libertarian Party, Dan Reale. So I just want you all to know we have 4 choices, not 2 in
Joe
this
Visconti.
election. And Joe Visconti is the petitioning candidate for mayor. So when you're voting, for governor, sorry. So, yes, long day. So when you're looking at the ballot, look at the whole ballot, not just the top 2 rows. So thank you both for coming on the show. I think it was really interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Next week, Colin Bennett, who is running for state senate in the 33rd district, will be our guest. And then after that, we'll get out of campaign mode and do some other fun stuff.
Yay.
So we'll see you next week, and good luck to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jacket and I